Welcome again to the E3 Summit. Thank you all for joining us today and leaning in for conversations and storytelling around change. I am Terry Clement, and I'll be your moderator for today's session, and get us going here in just a moment. Some more people come on in, there's plenty of seats. Two things, just so you know, we will definitely keep an eye on the time, and we'll be stopping with a few minutes left, but towards the end of our session, we will have an opportunity for you to ask questions of our panel. We do ask that you think about those along the way, and with your phones, if you'd like to submit those questions, I'll be monitoring those. And there is QR codes out on the tables. There's one QR code to submit questions, and one QR code to access a PDF of the slides for today. So you have access to all of those, whatever you need. Real quick, just want to quickly introduce our panel. To my right, we have Amy Haber with E3 Alliance. Amy's been with E3 almost a decade, supporting schools throughout the region and across Texas, literally across Texas, because she's been to the east border, the west border, and also has worked throughout South Texas as well. We have Yvonne Samaniego, who's here from Fort Hancock ISD. Welcome, Yvonne. She's the Assistant Superintendent of that district out in West Texas, the El Paso area. And then we have Jessica Robbins, the Executive Director of Teaching and Learning at Rockport Fulton ISD. Teach at the beach, I come to say. And she has with her one of her amazing school leaders, Principal Jodi from Rockport Fulton High School. So welcome everybody. This is our panel. They've traveled across the state to come share their story today. Super excited for you guys to get to hear from them. And I am Terry, and I'll be your moderator today. I'm actually going to ask Amy to kick us off and share some context around the stories that these amazing school leaders will be sharing with you today. Amy?
All right.
Roll
on. Okay. So again, as Terry was saying, sharing a little bit of context with you guys as to the journey that these leaders have been on with their district. I figure out where to stand so I'm not in front of them. So we're going to start with an acronym that those of you who are educators in a district or on a campus have probably heard a lot recently in the last few years, and that it's starting to even be heard about in the news and things like that because it is becoming part of our statute. But what is HQIM and why does it matter? So HQIM stands for High Quality Instructional Materials, and just that acronym starts to maybe beg the question of like, well, why are there instructional materials that aren't high quality? Well, not on purpose, right? But what makes HQIM different than other instructional materials is a kind of like technical checklist that TEA and the state has, kind of set forth as this is what we believe a high quality instructional material must contain. So in the past, we could throw those words around if we thought something was high quality, but now it is more of a technical phrase that is starting to, make a difference in the materials that are out there for districts to purchase, and also, like I said, it's also something that's impacting some of the policy that school districts have to put in place. So what is that sort of checklist? What makes something, technically makes something an HQIM? It is 100% aligned with grade level supports or standards. So in Texas, of course, that's our TEKS. So the instructional material that is to be considered that it has to cover 100% of the TEKS for that grade level, and it also has to be 100% aligned with those TEKS. So it is on grade level material. It is based on research-based instructional strategies that are integrated throughout. So what we know of, science of teaching reading is definitely a phrase that is in our vocabulary now after a lot of things that have happened to been put in place across the state, but the same thing for math. So it is the science that we know about the best way to teach that content the material is designed for. So that is definitely something that is already integrated throughout the HQIM. It is not something that is on the teacher to try to.
Your mic is coming out of the night.
We don't use the mic.
We'll do that. Let's be honest. We're plenty loud for this room.
I was gonna say, I thought he was gonna be like, you're too loud. And then it already incorporates, or it includes differentiated support for all learners. Now I feel like it's echoing.
Yeah. Lisa can give you thumbs up. Can you hear it okay?
Yeah. Okay. There's like a weird echo right here. And so when teachers are using the HQIM, there's already things in there to say, hey, this is how we support students who are, not that English isn't their first language, or this is how we support students who are receiving special education services. So some of those supports are already in there. And then the last piece, which is really important, was a big differentiator from current HQIM to past instructional materials, is that it includes both student-facing and teacher-facing materials. So all of those things have to be present for something to be considered an HQIM. Now, why does it matter? What we know is that you can have a really great teacher, but if they are having to create their own materials, or they're having to spend a lot of their intellectual energy, coming up with materials that could impact their ability to serve their students. So we know that HQIM has a positive impact on student learning because you're all starting from the same starting place with having this instructional material to build your teaching expertise off of. Student outcomes improve when they have access to grade level assignments. So by using an HQIM, you are assured that students are learning at grade level. They have access to strong instruction. They have deep engagement and teachers with high expectations. So of those things, having an HQIM at least helps ensure those grade level assignments are in place so that then teachers and school leaders can help with those other areas. So HQIM is a way that really supports teachers to ensure that they are able to help their students have access to rigorous grade level instruction. So what does this mean for students, or kind of what's out there in this space for students? So there was a study done in 2018 called the Opportunity Myth. This looked at a lot of instructional materials across the country, not just in Texas, but several districts across Texas were included. It looked at instructional materials across the grade band, so all the way secondary, elementary, all in between. And what they found is there's this myth that has existed in our profession that if students show up and they do what they're asked to do, that they are going to be successful. They're going to get what they need to be successful, either in career, college, whatever their path is. But what this research study showed is that a lot of students are not experiencing grade level instruction. So that means they show up, they do what they're supposed to do, they're successful on their assignments, but they never actually are climbing that ladder that leads to the pathway, whether it's career or college, that they are dreaming about, right? So just showing up and doing what your teacher is telling you to do is not enough if your teacher is never having access to grade level materials. We also know from some other studies that were done from the teacher side that a lot of the work that teachers do is heavily focused on sourcing materials and not necessarily planning for instruction. We know that a lot of people are planning for instruction, but so much of their time, and we know that time is a very valuable resource for teachers, was spent selecting those materials or finding them themselves when they don't have a resource that includes all of that. So again, studies showing 7 to 12 hours per week that teachers were spending searching for instructional materials, and then after that 7 to 12 hours, having to decide how to use them, how to differentiate them, how to support their students in their classroom. So all of that to say, having access to high quality instructional materials is definitely could be one of the turning points to improve outcomes for students across the state of Texas. So one way that TEA is helping districts across the state start to build this awareness and also have access to HQIM is through a grant that's called the Strong Foundations Grant. It is about 3 years old now, and here's the statute that established it, but ultimately its purpose is to ensure that all of our students across Texas have access to rigorous grade appropriate content every day. So the grant has multiple pathways, a lot going on, but ultimately that is the grant's purpose. So it has two parts, planning and implementation. So in the planning piece, that's where districts start to do this learning about research-based instructional practices and the content they're focusing on. They start to get some look at some samples of materials, and they build an instructional framework for that content. And then some districts choose to move into implementation, which is where they get support to start implementing HQIM. The districts we have represented here both have gone through the planning process with E3 Alliance as their approved provider to help them through that process. And Yvonne's district is currently in the implementation phase, or in the implementation pathway for two types of HQIM. And so we are an approved provider for both parts. But today we're really focusing on that first part, the planning part, which is where you build an instructional framework for your district. So what is that framework? It's really a district-wide document. Much like a mission and vision pulls together the work of the district, a framework is content specific. So these districts have both written a framework for math, and Yvonne's district has also written a framework for literacy. So it is content specific that really outlines that vision of what that content instruction looks like across the district. So it has, and a plan for how to realize that vision. So in a framework, it includes a vision statement. We start with that, what do we want to see, the future of math or literacy education in our district. Then it has belief statements. So a lot of times those belief statements are really tied to the research-based best practices. We believe this is how instruction should look. And then it has stakeholder actions. Here's what leaders are going to do to make this happen. Here's what teachers are going to do to make this happen. Here's what families, here's either opportunities or what we should help our families do in order to make this possible. So different stakeholders there. So again, both of these different districts have created a framework for math, and Fort Hancock also created one for literacy. So how do we use those? That document becomes an anchor for the decision makers at the district and campus level. So when they're looking at instructional materials, they say what instructional material best serves our framework. Or they say, we want to bring in some professional learning for our teachers. What professional learning aligns to our framework? So now it's not just, a smorgasbord or a buffet of like, let's grab this and let's grab this. Now you have an anchor that allows you to pull together all of the things that touch that content of instruction for the district. So it becomes a decision-making filter for the leaders at the district level and at the campus level whenever they want to provide any sort of resources or support for that content. So, as I said, these guys were both part of the Strong Foundations Planning Grant with E3 Alliance as their provider. So this is kind of the path that they took. This, we did this with both districts in about a year for each content. So it started by kind of building a plan up front called a roadmap and a communications plan, how this is going to be shared with their stakeholders. And then they engaged in some collective learning. What are those research-based practices in math or literacy that we want to make sure are informing our framework? Then they had a committee that helped them develop the framework. And in both of these campuses, that committee was comprised of district leaders, campus leaders, and teachers. So it was very representative of the different levels and groups across the district, just to make sure it was informed. It's not just all elementary or all high school people, but everybody was part of that process. Then they're moving into implementation and potentially planning for instructional materials. So once you have that framework in place, saying, hey, do our current resources meet this need, or do we need to look at other resources that might better meet our need? So that's why we have these guys with you today, so that we have some questions planned to help them share their experience going through this process. And then now that they have frameworks in place, also sharing how that has helped them continue with their leadership. So with that in mind, the last thing I want to tell you guys about is this idea of leading change. So we know change management is a really important part anytime we try to implement something new or change the way that something is done, and that includes with instructional materials or putting research-based practices into place. So these mindsets, we know that mindset is an attitude or a set of attitudes that you bring to your interaction and you bring to your work. So the mindset of educators sometimes can be one of the challenges whenever you're trying to make change, right? We're humans, and this educators here doesn't mean just teachers. It could be district leaders, campus leaders, or teachers, anybody up and down the system there. And so we know that sometimes that mindset might be the initial barrier that we are bumping up against. We know that strategic leadership tools and strategies, really how you lead that change and how you communicate that change, is one way that you can shift that mindset to accept change. And with that in mind, this framework that they have created, because it is a shared document that provides clarity and consistency across the district, that can be one of those tools for mindset change as you continue, like I said, to make changes to your system, whether that's materials or practices. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to Terry. So you
Guys, can y'all give snaps to my friend Amy? She gave a
Sorry.
15-minute summary, like, read the word.
I'm trying to get you guys to the people that you really want to talk to.
Switch. I want to go with you. Okay, sorry. Yeah, that way, because I want to watch your questions. Just a quick reminder that we do have, there it goes, that we do have a QR code on the table. So if you, while Amy was chatting, if you have questions, because Amy is actually going to kind of supplement on our panel here. So if you had any questions about what Amy shared, or for our panelists, just keep those in mind. I have some questions I'm going to guide them through, but if you have something that comes up, just submit it through your phone there. Real quick, just refreshing you on who these beautiful people are. Jessica and Jodi are with Rockport Fulton ISD, artist formerly known as. We also got to learn what it looks like when a district changes its name. Woo! That's no small task. So if you have questions about that, stay after for that. But they got a team of leaders, built a MAP framework, and they're moving forward using that in leadership and decision making. And Yvonne's district, like Amy mentioned, went through both processes consecutively, not simultaneously.
Yeah, so
they've really been at this for a few years. So there's a wealth of knowledge up here. So if you have any questions about that process when we're done with our panel first. But I'm actually going to kick it off with this question first. And by the way, we're not going to do the mic. I feel like Lisa, will you continue to be our monitor and let us know? Thank you. So our friend Lisa there's going to let us know if they can hear you. So just speak comfortably. I'm sure it's fine. And you were asking earlier, I'm just going to ask them to popcorn responses to my questions. My first question is, why did you want to engage in this work? What were the most important outcomes that you anticipated for your students, your teachers, your leaders in the process? And I'll just let you popcorn around that.
So I'll kick us off with that. I will tell you that when all of this language around HQIM was becoming very known in the state around that crazy pandemic year, it seemed fast and furious. And many district leaders, I think, had that same shell shock look, like how on earth are we going to implement these huge systems so quickly? And so we were a little bit slow to the game. We didn't just jump on the bandwagon right out of the chute. But there was a point where we recognized that there was an opportunity here for kids that could really change the game and leveling this playing field and providing that equitable access to high quality instruction across our system, and we desperately needed that support system. There was grant funding, not just, I felt like resources and money were being thrown at us at this rapid rate, and we were all just trying to figure out which ball to catch and where to go next. The money wasn't just there to buy the resource, but to also pay for the support to implement. And so that was a big piece for us, is we knew that we would have a support structure in place. We don't have a huge system. We don't have a giant curriculum team. We don't have lots of coordinators all over so it was like, this is a way for us to get access to support during a really major change element that could impact students right at the classroom level. And so that was a lot of what motivated our work to go in and support. So
do you have anything to add?
Yeah, and I think the same thing for us. We're, we come from a small district, and so we don't have the support team to build, all of the curriculum. But what was nice about this is that I saw alignment. So when you have small districts and you don't have alignment, that makes a huge difference. And yet when you do have it, then it can be very powerful. And so that was my vision, is that hopefully this will bring something district-wide so that we're all speaking the same language, and the accountability or the expectations for every teacher and for every student is same from pre-K to 12. That was my reasoning for engaging in this.
Jodi, from your role as a campus leader, you want to contribute to
Sure.
what you were hoping?
Yeah, I think for me, having access to grade level instructional materials is a win for students. But as a campus leader coming into the district, I saw frustrations from teachers of not having access to the resources they needed. And so the ability to be able to put something into their hands and get everybody on the same page was a very powerful, I knew would just make us move into the direction that we all wanted to go to. We just didn't know how to get there with the resources that we had.
Excellent, thank you.
Terry, I'll just add really
Oh,
quickly, why did E3? Because we had to go through a lot of training, our team had to go through a lot of training and a lot of hoops, shall we say, to be an approved provider. And why did we think this work was important for us to be a part of as our organization? And I will say, some of you have worked with our team in the past through some school coaching, through different engagements. And Terry and I can go into a school and we can support teachers, we can support leaders to build good instructional systems. But if you're working off of something that isn't at grade level, even the best teacher is going to struggle to show growth to their students, right? So we saw this also as a way for us to, again, with the equity piece, to really be able to engage in this work, to really continue our journey of making sure students had equitable access to strong education.
Thank you for that, we appreciate it. I'm going to go on to our next question. Why was it important for you to engage a representative team? Back to that team that Amy mentioned, the team that you put together. How did that team play a role in making the framework development successful, and how's that team working for you now in these spaces that you're in? Just who wants to get that off?
I'll jump in. For me, again, as a campus leader, and at the time I was at the middle school, and so I'm really in the middle. So that importance of having vertical alignment and all stakeholders having a voice in it and getting people in the room to have good conversations. And we had brought our K through 12 math teachers all in one space. And when they took out chart paper and started writing down skills that they thought, and it was, you have a calculus teacher asking a question to an elementary teacher. When we were at that point, there were just some good conversations that if you don't get everybody together to have that, like we wouldn't have seen.
It was scary and magical.
Yes, it was like, we were just watching in amazement. But I think that vertical alignment piece was something that we had to have.
Something that lives in my mind from the experience with you guys is we were looking at data, and their teacher that supported students with their TSI was one of the teachers in the room, and so he's talking about TSI. And then the early elementary people are like, what is that? We don't even know what that is. It's a test, a college readiness test, right? And just like that awareness, because we know that basis that kids get in elementary is a lot of the content that prepares them for TSI, but just for him to be able to explain that and the importance of it was really powerful.
And to add on to that experience in Rockport that we were seeing, I will tell you that going back to the research around change, anytime you can engage multiple stakeholders, it's a win, right? So that aspect was certainly there, and just knowing the theory behind that practice is critical. I do want to say that we were probably another year out after we built the framework when the middle school decided, and Dr. Carter was like, we got to nail this something down. We're really there. Some of those teacher voices get to be those lead voices. Dr. Carter, who was in the process with us for the framework, and then also her staff. So when it was time for us to go all in on a middle school HQIM, guess who made that decision? The entire math team. And it was all rooted in the framework. Like they helped us build look floors that came from the framework that their colleagues had created. Not that TEA handed them, not that the district office handed them. It was a document that they had built. We built the look-fors with these lovely ladies' support. And then we said, okay, how do we move forward in this process? And those teachers called the shot. I mean, they were the ones that said, give us Carnegie. Like, that was a huge thing, and we couldn't have done that without the work that had gone into the framework. It would have felt a lot more like a traditional textbook adoption, which we've done many times.
Well, I'll say Yvonne, I don't know, I also got to work with Yvonne's, both her math committee and her literacy committee, and with literacy especially, because of the way we were able to plan it on their district PD days. Like, they are a small district, and they had every single literacy teacher, pre-K-12 in the room, and that was pretty powerful. I don't know if you can speak to that.
And I think what helps is that then you have buy-in because it was their voice. So they created the framework. So they can't say, I don't like this. Well, you created it. And another thing is that you're right. Sometimes we forget the voices of the special education department, you know, the bilingual, and then the early childhood, and so I think that when you have that, then there's that mutual respect that district-wide we're working towards a common goal, and that's so that we can make sure that we're big picture, right? That our students are successful when they do leave our district, and so it's important for us to build that strong foundation for them. But then also because we know that we're working towards that, then it makes us even stronger when our students move to a different district, because we know that hey, we equip our students. We know that at least with us, there's not going to be as many gaps, because you get them when they're coming in, right?
Yeah.
So I think that also helps.
Yvonne, I'll get you to start us this next one. The question is, how, and Jessica already kind of mentioned something, but thinking back on your experience with getting new textbooks or getting new materials over the years, how did this process change with the framework in place?
Well, see, we started to do the framework, and then in the middle of it, our elementary principal, who was brand new, had gone to look at the HQIM, which was amplified at that time, at one of the service centers, and the teachers came back and they're like, we really love this, and we really want to start with it. And we're like, well, just wait till the year ends, and when we start the next year. And she was all adamant about it and stuff. Let's start now. And we're like, all right, we can start, but full blown the next year. And so I think that what was nice is that it came from the teachers, and they saw the material, and so they became the leaders. And so when we were rolling out the framework, then they were kind of able to put it together. Yeah. And so it's nice when it comes from them, because I go back to the buy-in.
I will say both with Jodi's middle school team that was investigating, and then your team as well. It was also interesting because part of this process is that learning about research-based practices. And so I know when I was a teacher and I was given a resource, a textbook, and I didn't really understand all the design that went into that textbook. I know really smart people who knew a lot about education and pedagogy wrote it, but I didn't understand why it was laid out this way. And I think that's something different too. Like, I've heard your teachers, make connections between, productive struggle, and look, this is where that is in the HQIM. So I think just that knowledge of what design went into the materials came out of this process as well. So as they're using it, it starts to make sense to them.
Those were good conversations to hear. Prior to that, they probably hadn't thought much about teacher-facing versus student-facing. Like, those resources and the language and the productive, they were critically analyzing multiple resources, and in small groups at tables, and then as the entire group, and having good in-depth conversations. So it built up their confidence in the process, but then also the resource. So then when it came time for us to kind of have a consensus about where we fell on this, there was some very good conversations about it, leaning one towards the other where we fell, but that confidence and to see through that process of doing that, I think took the framework and then took the resources. And if we didn't have that framework, I think we would have struggled a little bit with doing the other process. But together, we all had confidence in what we were walking out with the understanding it was still going to be a lot of work this year when they started using it. and they knew that, but they were willing to take that challenge on.
So we were going through the science adoption at the same time as we were working through this math process. I can't even begin to tell you which one was the elite model. And sure enough, like now we're in the implementation stage with science, and I'm just gonna tell you, the conversations are weaker. They're exactly what they sounded like with the old way, where we have this math framework, it's completely different. I mean, their understanding in depth is so different. So I guess we need a science framework now.
I'm actually going to jump to this question, and audience, if you'll think about this as well, because if we change one thing after your time in this room today, we should all be able to go forward in the world and explain what HQIM is to other people. I just think it's important, water cooler conversation, but just kind of a fun reflection. How would you explain HQIM to others who are not yet familiar, whether they're educators or just people in your family? How would you explain what is HQIM? Because it is a new thing that's becoming, more part of our.
Simple. I think supported teachers, effective instruction. I don't know, like if I just had to simplify it, resources that support teachers.
Right.
Yeah, sure.
Let's take a moment just so you can talk to each other. Would you, someone talk to a shoulder partner near you? How would you, if you had to leave here and explain HQI to somebody? Let's just take 2 minutes to talk. Go.
Hopefully you guys got a little 10-second elevator pitch on HQIM.
Yes. So you're making my home life successful because I go home every day and my husband's like, what do you do today? I'm like, change the world. So we've done that now. Everybody knows what HQIM is because there are people out there who are wondering, and now you'll be able to help. So spread the word. Hey, cool. Last question for our panel is, you guys, if you're just reflecting on your journey, which part of this work has been the most impactful for you in your own journey as an educator, your students, your teachers, your leaders? How do you see it impacting their lives so far in the journey? And if each of you could speak to that, whoever wants to start.
I'll take off with this one. So, teaching is a hard profession, I believe, to live in right now. And right now, our staff, there's a degree of confidence that I see that I haven't seen over 12 years in this role, because we're allowing some of the heavy lifting to be happening somewhere else so they can focus on the actual instruction. We can quit agonizing over drafting long lesson plans, over doing their own scripting, over figuring out where to pull from all these places. So for me, that, and I will, in my role, it's my job to make sure teachers are taken care of so that kids can be taken care of. And so that's the piece that has been most impactful, is to sit in rooms where the heavy lifting around instructional design is happening in another place so they can focus on this core work of delivering to kids.
I'm gonna snap out.
And I want to add to that with the ladies coming in. See, I'm not blessed with Terry, I'm blessed with Betty, who had to walk out, right, and Amy. And they're our team, and they've been working with us for about 4 years now. And so what's nice about it is that we have someone from the outside looking in. Because when you only, we don't know what we don't know, right? You all have heard that. And so when these ladies come in, they come in and shine the light, and it's with grace. It's not like, what are you doing? No, it's like, come on, girl, let's do it. Let's try this or that. And so what I feel is that what we benefit from is someone that is a team player that comes in to help to work with us, and and comes to help our teachers and our students understand that it's not easy, you know, it isn't. But yet, you know, with these resources that are coming in, you know, there's another way that we can approach teaching and the students approach learning, because the students are having to learn this now differently, and they're like, that's not how we used to do it before. And so it's nice to have that cushion where we can have lives outside.
I think when I, coming into Rockport and looking over the data and then looking historically and seeing that like the gaps were just getting bigger and the students were struggling, the teachers were struggling because they just felt like they can't multiply, they can't do this, how can I do this? There was this whole get caught up on everything. And so I think I was sensing from the staff that this was like almost unmanageable. Like, how can I do this? I can't do this. And so you could sense that sheer frustration. And then again, we had Amy and Terry, two wonderful ladies that come in and really were able to come into our district and really meet us where we were, and without judgment, but with grace and support, and it kind of lift us up and say, all right, this is where we are, but we got this. And so it was this sense of like, yeah, like we're in this. And then you could see that kind of sense of like, we can do this together. And it built up a lot of, I think, teamwork and really working together, and then understanding strengths and challenges of even our coworkers within our team at the campus, acknowledging those, but then also lifting them up. So I just think at the end of the day, for me, the impact was on watching a group of individuals in the building and kind of really come together through a process that was very challenging, but feel optimistic when they came out of it. And that's hard to do in education, because it is a hard job, regardless of what role you play in it. Every day is a challenge. And so I think that was probably for me what I felt.
Amy, do you have anything you want to add?
Well, I do my work differently today than I did 3 years ago, partly because I learned something from every school or school leader I get to interact with, but also just, again, really what all three of you kind of said, I think back to when I was teaching and the work that I did at night when my kids were at home, you know, and I spent all this time, and now I see like, oh, these resources are available, what would that change my working life, and also what could I have been doing for kids all these years that I hadn't been doing before. So for me, that impact was, you know, it doesn't matter what role you're in, there is always room to grow, and this has been something that's really grown me. So I enjoy being a part of it, learning from you guys in your districts.
And I think my big takeaway is, just to kind of tie together, is one of the things that the framework and the understanding does is it gives a common language in the family. You know, where if it's the district where you work or the district where you live, or for some of us that's the same. But imagine that we all have the same idea about what high quality math instruction is. That would be incredible. And it's saying I have that perspective as a parent and as an educator and someone that works with educators and supports them and wants to support teachers. Agreed, it is a hard profession, but man, it's worth it. And if you can lower some of that stress by speaking the same language, it can make a huge difference for teachers and for the kids. So I agree. Thank you all for that. Sure. I have one big question that two people are very interested in seeing these frameworks we keep talking about. So I think what we'd love to do, and again, you can submit more questions. We have a few minutes. If you're interested in seeing the framework, ladies, be glad to share. So you have on the tables and here the email address for Amy and I. What we can do is send you a PDF copy if you like, or a link to it. Would that be okay?
Yeah, sure.
Absolutely. But that's what it is. Yes, you have
I'm trying to submit a question.
Oh, no worries.
Probably the dominant instructional model that I see when I go to classrooms in our district is that traditional explicit instruction and then practice. Recognizing that you want those research-based instruction strategies, so discussions and productive struggle and conceptual foundations embedded in your framework. How did you elevate that when potentially your teachers building it have little experience possibly with that? Or what suggestions would you have for a district with teachers with fewer experiences with the research-based instructional strategies, elevating that to the top of the framework?
Anybody want to hop in?
Well, I think because if you're talking, it doesn't matter, I guess, if you're Eureka Amplifier or Carnegie, because we use all three, it comes with it. But then with the internalization, then that's where you make it your own. And that's where you adapt it to what your weaknesses are, right, as a teacher, and make it what it needs to be, right? With our instructional coach, this year we've got a math instructional coach. And then not only that, but then looking at your students, right? And making sure that they're getting rigorous, grade level instruction. And so being true to the R's and reflecting on that. But that's where the internalization comes
I
from.
would
You've got
say,
it
Terry,
there.
if you'll flip back to,
So
just
the
to quick answer
process.
your question, is that is part of the process. That's like a required part of the process, is that your team that is gonna be engaged in writing the framework has to go through some training, that collective learning on research-based instructional practices for that content.
I also like what Yvonne was speaking to also is how do you make the change happen?
On a day-to-day
So let's say we all learn some stuff, we write a beautiful document. If we're doing this for kids, and how do we get it to kids?
I was saying, if you guys were with principal
Yeah.
walls this morning, that's just the first step,
Paula,
having the
because you
document.
get the beautiful documents, but then the fact is you get busy. And that people get back to their comfort level if we don't make change, and we have to hold each other accountable. That's why I like what you were saying is, if we're all speaking the same language, it's easier for me to give you feedback saying, remember our document we're following, so that it becomes a change tool. That's kind of what you were saying.
To follow up on that, like, I'm assuming that having outside resources, because we're neighboring districts,
Yeah.
all the same things, I feel like some of it comes down to philosophical beliefs about the science of reading versus about literacy, philosophical beliefs about conceptual mathematics versus memorizing facts. And that must happen early on in this process,
Sure.
and I think that's kind of, how do you work through that, because there are two sides to that coin, and there the two shall meet sometimes, right? And I feel like that's the battle we fight every day, even though we have a written curriculum and we have some HQI.
Sure. Well, and I will say again, just that is part of the process of the learning, but it's not gonna fix everything, right? But exposure. I will also say, I'm gonna turn this back to you guys because it was a representative team. And like Yvonne, for her literacy, every teacher did sit in on the learning part, but you guys also carefully selected like open-minded, positive people who were learners to be part of that committee.
Yes, and I will say that is just a journey, right? So there's no better moment for me than when I'm sitting in a PLC. It happened just last week. I was sitting in a PLC and someone who had been part of that committee brought some component of that framework out. And I think that goes back to forming a representative team where everyone is present for that experience, because I desperately need those voices in the room that are not necessarily me or the instructional coach or even the principal. Like when a teacher says, because we didn't adopt a bunch of HQIM. So we also had to apply it to things we already had in our system. So to be able to take that learning process and those tools and bring it in, it's an ongoing conversation. I mean, it really is.
But going back to the framework every time.
Going back to the
That's what
framework,
I
yeah.
keep hearing from you, is
Yes.
don't just put it away and publish it and never touch it
Yeah.
again. It's
Well-
always in their hands, yeah.
And I would say back to your question and your follow-up, part of the process of having outside people to come in and facilitate that process is
Yeah.
we were able to push back a little bit on some of the ideas, like, if somebody, we're doing a draft of the framework and they really want this in there, and we're like, okay, we're gonna reword it this way, like we were able to do some of that shaping.
And they pulled out our data. I mean, bottom line, like they flashed the data on the wall. And so then you do have to start going, I mean, it was hard, raw conversations at our tables, but in a very supportive atmosphere. So it was just, yeah.
We're about out of time, but we have one quick question just to bounce off. If not, we can stay after and talk about it. But someone was wondering, have you expanded any of this to after-school programs? Do you see your understanding, your framework being applied to what you're doing in other environments other than Tier 1 or primary instruction? And if not,
Well, we're part of ADSI as well.
okay.
And so that means that we have to do it during the summer.
I'm gonna say, additional school
Day-
or additional day.
Additional days school year.
Yeah, sorry,
So
for those of
with
you.
the 180 days that you do, so then you get paid the other days that you have. So our summer school is that. And so we're required to use the HQIM during summer school. So then that's a continuation of what.
But I would say your framework definitely is still part since you're instructional leaders.
Yeah, that's
Guys, can you just give our big round of applause?